happened 2 summers ago while I was house sitting out in California for an older couple I had met at a conference for work. It seemed like a dream scenario. The couple wanted to vacation in Hawaii for 2 weeks, but didn't want to board their cats. And I had been chatting with them about wanting to visit California again, because I had loved it the first time I went, and we figured that it could mutually benefit if I came out and house sat for them. So I flew out there, and they showed me around for a few days. Taught me how to care for the cats, 2 of them, one that was extremely shy and I barely saw, which is important later, and their plants, and gave me access to their house and cars. These people were so generous. Before I knew it, I had dropped them off at the airport and was on my own. At first, it really was the dream vacation. I was staying in Oakland and making forays into San Fran, Sonoma, Monterey. In the mornings, I could walk out the front door and shortly be hiking the paths surrounding nearby Mount Diablo, and I was just ultra content with the world. I was so enamored by the area that had actually started looking into taking some steps to relocate out there even. But then one day, about halfway through my final week there, when I had gotten back to the house, I felt really odd, almost like I shouldn't go inside. I shook it off and went inside anyway, because it was getting late and I needed to put out dinner for the cats. Once I was inside, I forced myself to ignore how off I felt. I made some food for myself, went to bed, and was shocked to find the shy cat hiding under my bed and crying. This was the first time I'd even seen her close up. The entire time I had been there up to that point, she had never really left my host's bedroom unless she didn't realize I was around. Again, I ignored feeling weird and just assumed that she had decided I was okay and went to bed. I did start locking my bedroom door that night, though. I also remember that about halfway through that night, I thought I heard someone walking around in the gravel outside of my window, but after listening for a bit, I didn't hear anything else and went back to bed. The day after, in the morning, I still felt a little odd, but kept up with my plans for the day. I drove out to a little music festival in Sonoma and went clothes shopping and had an overall great day. When I got back to the house, though, I found the front door locked in a way I hadn't left it. Basically, my hosts never lock the deadbolt, only the lower, second lock, and that's the only lock my key worked on, so I never messed with the deadbolt, but it was definitely locked. So I had to call my hosts and find the hideaway key, which, to their credit, safety-wise, was buried like a whole foot underneath a bush outside, and had definitely not been unearthed for a long time. So I used that, went inside, and kept the key with me just in case it happened again. And it did, but with a different door. This time I had stepped out into the garage to get a drink, and when I turned around to go back into the house, the door was shut and locked. I could use my normal key on that door, but I was still pretty bewildered. My own cats are whack, so I think my mind was just trying to come up with a way that cats could be locking me out of the house, but I was coming up empty. I decided I must have been misunderstanding how the locks worked, and just wrote it off and started checking and triple-checking locks when I went out of the house, or into the garage. That night, when I went to bed, the really awful feeling of unease was still there, and so was the shy cat, who was clearly unhappy to see me, but also wouldn't leave my room. But again, I just locked my bedroom door and went to sleep. The next morning, I felt awful. Nausea, body ache. I had no desire to leave the house, so I decided to stay in and Netflix for a day. This vacation stay was like a full 2 weeks, so I didn't feel like I was in a hurry to get all my touristy things in. But as the day went on, I started to feel that feeling of wrongness again, and it morphed into feeling incredibly watched. Around mid-afternoon, it got to the point that I was so uneasy that, even feeling awful, I decided to get out of the house for a bit to shake it off. I was getting a bit low on food, so I went to the grocery store and bought a couple of food items that I didn't think would hurt my stomach. And as I started to leave the checkout, the cashier said the generic, "Have a great evening." And I just instantly started crying, shocking myself and the poor cashier, because I just had this intrusive thought that said, "You might be the last person to ever say that to me." When I got to my car, I was still crying, and my entire body was telling me not to drive back to the house. I couldn't not, though, because I didn't want to neglect the cats. So I drove back, parked in the driveway, and convinced myself after about a half hour just to open the front door. Once I did that, I thought I would get over it and be able to go in and at least feed the cats, and then maybe I'd go get a hotel room after. But my body physically would not let me inside. It was like I was stuck in the entryway. I then made a deal with myself. I would yell into the house, saying I'd already called the police and that they were on their way. In panic logic, I figured that it would make anyone in the house leave. So, I faced the inside of the house, looking down the hallway towards the bedrooms, and I did just that. The second I had finished saying, "They're almost here, so if you want to avoid being arrested, you need to leave now," the light in my host's room turned on, and I heard some banging. I immediately hightailed it back to the car, called the police for real, and proceeded to have a mental breakdown while talking to the dispatcher. Once they got there, they checked the house and didn't find anyone. But the double doors in my host's bedroom were left wide open. I'm so glad the cats didn't get out. And there was a pile of food wrappers in the corner behind the blinds. So they said it looked like someone had been there. What makes it so scary to me is that nothing was taken, and that based on the shape of the house, that would have been the perfect vantage point to see me in the living room as I stayed home sick. To explain this, the house was an L shape, and from the windows into the garden that were in my host's bedroom, you could see the living room windows. Also, the minute the police were gone, they said they couldn't prove anyone was there, as there were no signs of forced entry, and we couldn't get a hold of my hosts immediately to verify if anything had been taken, so they said that they'd patrol a bit, but nothing else. The shy cat was right back in my host's bedroom, and I didn't see her again until I left to go back home. So basically, I think the intruder had been there at least 2 days, forcing her to choose between two strangers and leading her to choose the one that was a little less strange, me. It messed me up pretty bad, especially because they didn't catch the person and didn't seem to have any desire to look, and I still had to stay in that house for the next 3 days. Nothing else odd happened, and I didn't feel anything off the rest of the time I was there, but the damage was done. I'd never felt completely safe in a home without doing a complete search before bed since. But I'm extremely glad my gut spoke up. I guess I'd rather have some residual anxiety than be dead. So whoever was in my host's house watching me, let's please never meet. I just graduated from college and was still living outside the major city my school was near. There's public transit that's relatively reliable, so sometimes I would go into the city for special occasions, knowing I could get back safely. For Halloween that year, my boyfriend and I decided to take the train and actually go to an event, not just a house party. This is only important because of how it influenced my outfit. As a female, there are a lot of footwear rules, and I was worried that if I didn't wear heels, I might not be allowed into the club we were going to. I debated for, well, way too long, and I switched between heels and flats a couple of times. I was wearing a black dress that I turned into a black widow spider costume by putting a red cutout in the front, and in the end, I ended up wearing black Chucks, sneakers. The night was great and relatively uneventful, and I didn't get hassled about my flats. At some point, I decided I was exhausted and wanted to head home, but boyfriend was going on strong and didn't really want to leave, which was no problem since we took public transportation. Insert foreshadowy eye roll. He gave me the key to his house, which was about a mile from the train station, and we planned that I would head back, and he would join me later. The mile I had to cover went by a mall, a school, finally a church that abruptly ended and turned into a row of houses that boyfriend lived in. There was a designated sidewalk the whole way, but it also ran along a 4-lane road. I knew that there was a potential for late-night vagabonds, but I figured that they most likely would be around a station or a mall. So by the time I was at the church and could see my destination, which was the second house on the row, I was considering myself safe. As I passed the church on the right sidewalk, I'm about 200 yards from the house, and I hear a vehicle start to slow down as it approaches on my left. Speed limit for this area was 35 miles per hour, but people often fly down it, and I'd say on average, people go about 45, given there were 2 lanes each way. The van had probably been going about 45 because the sound of it slowing down was noticeable. I say van because the sound of the de-escalation caused me to turn and see a white, hard-sided, really dark-tinted, front-windowed van pulling over. Luckily, it was going so fast, it wasn't able to stop until it had pulled past me about 20 yards, where it just sat idling next to the sidewalk. I stopped walking because there was no reason for the van to stop there, and I didn't want to walk by the sliding door. After about 30 seconds of the van idling and no one getting out, I decided to quickly scuttle up the church flower beds so I wouldn't be close enough to be grabbed by anyone who might open the sliding door. At first, nothing happened, and I felt dumb for being paranoid, and that's when I sent 1,000 prayers for deciding to wear flats that day. After about 10 seconds of letting me walk on, so I still had about 150 yards to go, I heard the van gun its engine and watched as it zoomed by and then screeched to a stop in front of me about 10 feet away, cutting into the sidewalk with the tail sticking into the road. Hearing the driver's door open sent a jolt of adrenaline I had never felt before or since, and I took off sprinting in my glorious flats. As I passed the front of the van, I saw the driver passing the side mirror, meaning he was already outside the door attempting to make his way to the front. This is basically the end of my story because I, up on my tiptoes, sprinted all the way to the house and cut through some trees to lose him. I wasn't pursued any further, as far as I could tell, and was able to get inside and lock the door. I will always be grateful I ended up wearing flats that night so I could run for my life. I don't really like considering what might have happened if I had been in heels. Man in the van, let's never meet. This just happened tonight. My mom and I are currently placing heavier curtains to cover my windows. Basically, I sleep in a room that has a window to the side, which faces an alley. I don't know another word for it, but it's a really narrow piece of street in our subdivision. What separates my window and the alley is a fence and a bit of what we call our yard, just wider for a person to walk through, and some potted plants on the fence. I was lounging in my bed, browsing Reddit on the phone, when our neighbor shouted really loud by the window, and my mom went outside. Our neighbor told us that there was this guy peeping through the glass windows in my room. He was topless and was fiddling with his shorts. Turns out the glass windows we had weren't one way. You never noticed because there used to be a street light by this alley, and when you walked past it, you would just see your reflection on my window. It has been a couple of weeks since the street light burned out, and the curtain I had on wasn't enough to protect privacy. My mom reported it immediately while our neighbor stood guard, and when my mom returned, we placed heavier curtains in the windows. I know there's a lot of things going on here. We should have double-checked the windows, we should have placed heavier curtains in the first place, etc. But the fact of the matter is, no one should ever feel unsafe in their own home. I don't even want to think about how many nights the guy kept coming back to peep at me. Peeping Tom at the window. Let's not meet.